Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. We are back working through chapter 26, and our topic for the next couple of videos has to do with regulating electrolytes. And when we are talking about electrolytes, what we're really talking about in the body are ions. So if you're a chemist, you talk about ions basically. And if you're a biologist and you're talking about it in a body, you're going to say electrolytes instead. And we have 6 of the most important described for us as sodium ion, potassium ion, chloride ion, calcium ion, bicarbonate ion, and phosphate ion. Okay. And we've talked about regulating calcium ion already in Anatomy and Physiology Part 1. We're going to talk a little bit about bicarbonate ion in this video series, but our main focus will be on regulating sodium and potassium, our 2 old friends when it comes to electrolytes. And when we talk about sodium balance, remember sodium has the highest level in the extracellular fluid, which we've just talked about as being the plasma, as well as the interstitial fluid. And we see sodium at a high level in the ECF because of our old friend, the sodium-potassium exchange pump. And when we talk about sodium ion balance, we're really looking at sodium ion concentration balance, if you want to insert the word concentration. And so the thing that I think is interesting is when we talk about balancing sodium, we don't really talk about adjusting our intake or adjusting our output. So we don't really talk a whole lot about changing, getting more sodium into the body or getting more sodium out of the body. Instead, we regulate sodium ion concentration kind of through the back door, if you would kind of follow me in that reasoning. We regulate sodium ion concentration by altering the amount of fluid that we have. So if we have too much sodium, if it's too salty, we just add more water and that dilutes it out. If we don't have enough sodium, we get rid of the extra water and that concentrates it. When we're talking about our sodium level, we have what's described as hyponatremia. And we have what's called hypernatremia. And here we're using the other name for sodium, which is natrium. That's how we actually get the chemical symbol Na to represent sodium. And so we know that hypo means below. So hyponatremia is talking about a low sodium ion concentration level. And this can be caused by excessive water intake. So folks who are drinking a gallon jug of water in a short period of time are hurting their bodies. And realistically, we probably don't need to carry a gallon jug of water around to drink. Okay. We'll also see, in addition to excessive water intake, if you have excessive sweating, excessive diarrhea, this is one of those words I have to always check my spelling on, or excessive vomiting. You know, in each case, not only are you getting rid of water, but you're also getting rid of electrolytes. You're getting rid of that sodium. So these can also be causes of hyponatremia. You know, what's happening in the case of a hyponatremia, you're creating a hypotonic extracellular fluid. And we talked in our last video about a hypotonic extracellular fluid, what that's going to basically do. In the case of the hypotonic solution, you're going to get your cell to swell. Remember, your water follows salt. And if your extracellular fluid is really watery, so we can describe it as really watery, then we'll see the water will actually flow from the body fluids directly into your cells. And animal cells can swell and swell and swell until they finally burst or lyse open. So clearly, this is why it can be fatal to drink a large amount of water in a really short time. Now remember, we have osmoreceptors that are going to be detecting the sodium concentration. And what we'll see is in this case, we'll get an increase in the release of atrial natriuretic hormone. And this is a hormone that we've talked about before. When we get a release of atrial natriuretic hormone, then we're going to see a decrease in thirst. We're going to get a decrease in the release of the antidiuretic hormone, and we're going to get a decrease in the release of aldosterone. And so essentially what we're doing in this case, we're going to reduce our water, which is going to concentrate our sodium ion. And it's bringing it back up to normal. If we take a look at the flip side, if we talk about hypernatremia, this means we have an excessive amount of sodium ion concentration. And this can be caused by excessive water loss. So if you are losing water through sweating, vomiting, diarrhea, if you're just not drinking fluids the way that you should, right? We're going to see a concentration of our sodium. This can also be caused by hormonal imbalance, a hormonal imbalance in either ADH or aldosterone. And so we're going to take a few minutes and remind ourselves about both of these hormones so you can just make room for that in your notes. Essentially, what's happening in this case is exactly the opposite. We are creating a hypertonic extracellular fluid. And when we create a hypertonic extracellular fluid, we can basically talk about this as like salty. And what that's going to cause is a cell to dehydrate. So remember, fluid will shift or move from a hydrated area to a dehydrated area. So in this case, if our extracellular fluid is really salty, it's really concentrated, and that's going to actually pull water into the extracellular fluid. So this hypertonic solution is going to pull water from the cells. And so what we're going to see happening here is, again, we have those osmoreceptors, which are going to, in this case, signal the release of ADH. So ADH is going to be the major one that's going to be released here. And essentially what we see happening is we're going to, in this case, I'm going to say gain water. And this is going to dilute, or you could say flood, the sodium level. So let's take just a little bit of time to remind ourselves about ADH. ADH is our antidiuretic hormone. It can also go by the name vasopressin. This one has like two major jobs. So one of its job is to constrict peripheral, I'm just going to say actually constrict arterioles. So if you're constricting your arterioles, you're increasing blood pressure. And when you increase blood pressure, you're increasing filtration at the capillary. So this is helping water move into the body fluids. And then more specifically, you're going to get the addition of those aquaporin channels. In the cells of the DCT and the collecting duct. And this is going to increase facultative water reabsorption. So what we're really saying here is retain water, right? So in the case of the hypernatremia, where you have too salty solution, you want to retain water so that you're diluting that out and reestablishing that balance so that you're not pulling water out of your cells, so you're not dehydrating your cell. In the case of the hyponatremia, where you've got a real watery solution, you want to turn this off. And so we see the job of the atrial natriuretic hormone is to turn off the production of ADH. We've also mentioned here aldosterone. Remember, aldosterone has the job of turning on sodium ion, potassium ion exchange pumps at the, I would say, both DCT and the collecting duct and the nephron of the kidney. And so this is going to increase sodium retention. So again, in the terms of hyponatremia, third time's the charm today. In the case of hyponatremia, you want to turn off aldosterone because you don't want to retain the extra sodium. Let's pay attention to that. The aldosterone is going to turn on a sodium potassium exchange pump. And so we're going to see aldosterone playing a role in potassium regulation. When we talked here about hypernatremia, notice we said a hormonal balance of aldosterone can cause you to have elevated sodium levels because that aldosterone is turning on sodium retention. And if you remember, we talked about the hormone progesterone, which is released during parts of the menstrual cycle and during pregnancy, can sort of fit into aldosterone's receptor, and progesterone can cause sodium retention. And so really, like, the major takeaway here is wherever the sodium goes, water follows. And the way that we regulate sodium is actually through the manipulation of that water. I think the last thing that I want to say here is that a high osmolarity in the extracellular fluid will shut off aldosterone. So we should see this relationship happening here as we talk about regulating sodium and potassium levels. All right, you all, stay tuned. Up next is potassium regulation. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.